The call came one Tuesday as I stood in the middle of the Fairlawn funeral home, trying to decide which of the two casket covers to get, ivory, satin, or cream. The phone vibrated in my palm. Unknown number, Columbus area code. I almost let the call go to voicemail. Miss Chen, I'm Paul Garrett, Senior Claims Investigator for Midwest Life and Casualty. His voice was measured, with a calmness that seemed to be a habit. I'm calling about your father, James Chen's life insurance policy. I'm sorry for your loss. I stepped away from the display cases and headed down a narrow hallway that smelled of carpet cleaner and artificial flowers. Thank you. Is there a problem with the paperwork? My brother said everything was filed. There was a moment of silence, not long, maybe 2 seconds, but I noticed it. That's actually why I'm contacting you directly, Ms. Chen. There are some questions about the circumstances of the accident. I was hoping you might be able to spare a few minutes to talk. I remember the fluorescent light above my head twitching once. What kind of question? The police report lists the incident as a hit-and-run on Millbrook Road at around 9 p.m. on March 4th. We're reviewing the circumstantial evidence, and our team has a few things that don't add up. He said it as if he were talking about some minor clerical error. Just a few things doesn't add up. I don't want to scare you, but I want to make sure everything is in order before the claims process begins. My father was 67 years old. He had congestive heart failure and knee problems. He was asleep by 9 most nights. The sight of him walking down Millbrook Road at 9 o'clock on a cold March night, a 4-lane road with no sidewalks and a speed limit of 45 miles an hour, always made a jumble in my head. I kept telling myself that grief was not rational, that accidents were sudden, and that I was not supposed to understand it. What exactly doesn't fit? I asked, more silence. I'd rather discuss the details in person, Miss Chen, or at least on the phone, where you can sit down and talk. It's hard for you to digest so much when you're in the middle of all the arrangements. He was right, and in a way that made it worse, he was being cautious with me. I told him I'd call back that evening. I went back into the showroom, pointed at the ivory satin drape without looking closely, and mechanically handed the funeral director my credit card. The whole way home, Paul Garrett's words were playing in my head. It didn't add up. It was Derek who had called me that night. The Derek who had driven 40 minutes from his house in Westerville to identify the body before I arrived. Derek had contacted my father's lawyer the next morning and had the insurance papers on my kitchen table within a week. He had handled everything so perfectly. I was grateful. I actually called my cousin Lena and said, "Derek is really coming through. I don't know what I would do without him right now." I parked in my driveway and sat in the car for a long time. My father's policy had an accidental death rider of $400,000, a separate payment on top of the basic benefit, which only applied in the event of an accidental death. I was the only designated beneficiary. Derek was not named in the will. I hadn't thought about it much until recently. Derek and I weren't always this close. Growing up, he was 7 years older than me, which meant he was in high school when I learned to ride a bike. He was enrolled at Columbus State when I started middle school. We lived in the same house like 2 tenants in a building, polite, parallel, and rarely intermingled. But after Dad was diagnosed, everything changed. Congestive heart failure comes on slowly at first, then suddenly. The first year, Dad would just get tired quickly. He would mow the lawn twice instead of once, and he would sit down after climbing stairs. By the second year, he was on 6 medications and couldn't drive at night. By the third year, he needed someone to check on him every day. I lived 12 minutes away. Derek was 40. So all the responsibility fell on me, the shopping, the cardiology appointments, and watching Jeopardy with him on Tuesday nights when he couldn't sleep. I never got mad about it, not once. Derek came over for Christmas and sometimes for Sunday dinner. He would pat Dad on the shoulder and say, "You're looking pretty good, old man," and Dad would smile as if it were true. I told myself that Derek must have seen things differently. Some people shut up when they were scared. I trusted him as much as I had my doubts. Then in February, Dad had a bad week and Derek called me out of the blue. He said, "I want to help, tell me what you need." Within 2 weeks, he changed his work schedule, started coming every Thursday, and took over the responsibility of contacting the insurance company when Dad's supplemental claim paperwork got tangled up. He was organized in a way I wasn't. Spreadsheets, folder tabs, and a color-coded binder that appeared on Dad's kitchen counter as if it had always been there. I was so relieved I could have cried. Dad died on a Thursday in early March. The official report said he had been hit by a car while walking home from the corner pharmacy 2 blocks from home. It was a hit-and-run, the driver unknown. When I arrived at the hospital, Derek was already standing in the hallway outside the trauma bay, his arms folded across his chest, his eyes dry in that characteristic way. He did the identification. He spoke to the police officer. He called the funeral home. I signed whatever he put in front of me. Insurance forms, checklists for making an inventory of the estate, a letter authorizing Derek to be co-executor. He would come in with a manila folder, set it on my kitchen table, and explain it in the same calm, steady voice he used for everything. This will make the estate process go much faster. Simple. I would read the first paragraph, and my eyes would tear up from the page because I had only slept 4 hours a night and eaten cereal at night. And Derek would be there, steady and patient, the lid of his pen already open. I didn't know then that Dad had updated his will 8 months before he died. I later learned from the lawyer, not Derek, that Dad had left the house, the savings account, and everything in it to me. Undivided, undivided. In my name, with a handwritten note explaining that Derek was well established and that he wanted to make sure his little girl was taken care of. Derek went to the lawyer's office. He looked at the will. He had known everything for 8 months. And for 8 months, he had been helpful, steady, and there, bringing me files and uncapping pens, and I had called my cousin Lena and told her I didn't know what I would do without her. I sat in my driveway for a while longer. The investigator's name was Carol Wise. He worked in the Special Investigations Department of an insurance company, and when he called me one Tuesday morning, his voice sounded like the tone I use with nurses and social workers. Wary, practiced, the kind of voice that prepares you before you speak. He said, "I'd like to sit down with you. If it's convenient for you, straight to the point. I have some questions about the accident report." He came home 2 days later. He put a thin file on my kitchen table, the same table where Derek had spread out those forms, and he didn't even open the lid of a pen. He opened the picture. It was a picture of the intersection where Dad was believed to have died, taken from the angle of a police traffic camera. He put his finger on the tire tracks on the road. They went northeast to southwest, he said. The driver who reported hitting your father said he was traveling west on Elmfield when your father got off the sidewalk. She pulled out a second photo. If that were true, the marks would have run roughly east to west. They don't match that trajectory, not at all. I stared at the 2 photos side by side, and my heart sank. The officer who arrived on the scene noticed the discrepancy, but the initial report was made before the forensic report came in. It was overlooked. She paused. "We don't think it was an accident." She thought about it for a moment, then she turned to the next page. The time gaps were even more serious. Dad was found at 11:42 p.m. on Thursday. His phone showed a call to Derek at 11:09 p.m. That lasted 4 minutes. Derek told the police that he had been home all day, but his E-ZPass had recorded a toll 11 miles from the intersection at 11:21 p.m., 21 minutes, plenty of time. Derek told the police that he had driven out at night to calm his nerves. He couldn't sleep. He was devastated. He had told the detective this information before anyone asked about his whereabouts, before he even pulled up the toll records. He said it himself, Carol said quietly. Guilty people sometimes do that. They're afraid you'll find out, so they clean up the mess. Then she told me about the witness. 3 days after the accident, a man named Russell Pratt came forward and said that he had seen a pedestrian hit by a gray sedan at roughly the same time. His description matched the government report almost exactly: the make of the car, the direction of travel, the position on the sidewalk. Carol pushed a bank record across the table. $1,500. The money was transferred through an LLC account that Derek had opened the previous spring. Pratt gave a statement to the police. I looked at the number on the page, and my ears started ringing the way they do before you cry, but I didn't cry. I just kept looking at it. We've referred this to the county prosecutor's office, Carol said. I want you to know that you're not in any trouble. The policy is frozen pending investigation, but we don't believe you were involved. She was watching me carefully when she said that last part. I think she expected me to look relieved. Instead, I thought about the pen Derek had kept uncapped on my table, ready for whenever I needed to sign something. How he'd always made it so easy for me to stop reading. I asked her one question. Does he know you know? She looked at me for a moment before she answered. She said no. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and my phone face down on the passenger seat. Derek had texted me that morning, just a heart emoji, the way he did every few days since the funeral, little pulses of brotherly love that I had screenshot and saved because I thought I might want them someday. Proof that I hadn't been alone in this. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a long time. The thing about grief is it makes you porous. Every kindness gets in. Every hand on your shoulder, every cup of tea left on the counter, every I'm right here, Maya, you absorb it because you have nothing left to filter with. Derek had known that. He'd watched our father raise me, and he knew exactly what I was made of when I hurt. I went inside and I called him. Hey, he said. He sounded tired, fond. How are you doing? Can you come over? I need help with some of the estate paperwork. I'm getting confused by some of the dates. A pause that lasted maybe 1 second too long. Yeah, of course, give me an hour. I set my laptop on the kitchen table and angled it toward the chair where he always sat. I opened the camera application and pressed record. Then I made coffee I didn't drink and waited. He came in the way he always did, unlocking the door with the key he still had from when Dad got sick and we traded off staying over. He hugged me in the doorway. I let him. I registered the pressure of his arms and the familiar smell of his jacket, and I thought he practiced this. Not the hug specifically, but the version of himself he brought into this house. He'd been rehearsing Derek Who Loves Maya for 6 weeks straight, and he was very good at it. I put the bank record on the table between us. He looked at it. His face did something careful and controlled, a slight furrow, like he was trying to help me understand a document that confused him too. Where did you get this? He said. The insurance company. They've been investigating the accident claim. I kept my voice even. That's Russell Pratt's account number. I looked it up. Maya, the wire came from your LLC, Derek. Pratt gave his statement to the police 2 days after you paid him. He sat back. The helpful brother expression dropped. Not all at once, but in pieces, like a wall losing plaster. What was underneath wasn't anger. That surprised me. It was something more tired and more ugly. The look of a man who'd run a long distance and just now checked to see if anyone was still behind him. You don't understand how the will worked, he said. Dad had more than you know about. There were assets that should have been split. He left you the house in Dayton. That house is worth nothing. It was his decision. His jaw moved. He looked at the laptop, and I watched him register the green light on the camera. Something shifted in his posture then, a small, almost imperceptible collapse. I never wanted you hurt, he said. I thought about every night he'd sat across from me at this table. The way he'd refilled my water glass without being asked. The pen, always uncapped, always right there. "I know," I said, and I meant it, which was the part that would take the longest to get over. The police came the next morning, 2 detectives and a patrol car, all of it quieter than I'd expected. Derek didn't run. He walked out of his rental in dress clothes, like he'd known they were coming, and decided the least he could do was look presentable. I watched from my driveway across the street. I didn't go over. There was nothing to say that the laptop recording hadn't already said better. The arrest made the local news by afternoon. Insurance fraud, wire transfer fraud, tampering with a death scene. The article used the phrase alleged scheme 4 times, which felt almost quaint given that I had the wire transfers on a spreadsheet and Pratt had already pled guilty to his end of it. Derek hired an attorney by evening. Our aunt called me twice. I let it go to voicemail. The insurance company froze the claim the same day he was charged. Pending investigation, they said. I'd anticipated that. What I hadn't anticipated was how it would feel to sit in a house still full of my father's things, his reading glasses on the kitchen counter, his handwriting on a notepad by the phone, while lawyers and adjusters decided what his life had been worth and whether I deserved any of it. That part took 4 months. I kept working. I kept getting up. I went through his closet one weekend in March and folded everything into boxes, not because I was ready, but because leaving it there had started to feel like waiting for something that wasn't coming back, which it wasn't. That's the thing grief does. It lets you keep half believing in the impossible until you're too tired to keep up the arrangement. The check arrived on a Tuesday, certified mail, no fanfare. I sat with the envelope on the kitchen table for a long time before I opened it. The amount was exactly what the policy said it would be. Nothing extra, nothing symbolic, just the number. I thought about my father signing that policy. His neat, deliberate signature on every document, the way he'd always read the full page before he put his pen down. He'd named me as sole beneficiary 3 years before he died, during a quiet Sunday afternoon when I was home visiting. He hadn't made a production of it. He just said, I took care of some paperwork, and we went back to watching the game. Derek's trial was set for the fall. Pratt's cooperation agreement made the outcome fairly predictable, according to the attorney I'd hired to monitor the estate. I didn't attend the proceedings. I had no interest in watching my brother's face while a prosecutor built a case out of the things I'd handed them. I'd already seen everything I needed to see at that kitchen table, the wall coming down in pieces, the tired and ugly thing underneath. What stays with me, even now, is how useful my grief had been to him. I was distracted, overwhelmed, and dependent on his steadiness. Every night he sat across from me and refilled my water glass. He was also watching me not look at the documents. I wasn't a sister to him in those weeks. I was in a condition, the right weather for what he was doing. I don't say that to make it clean or simple. I say it because it's true and because the only way I know to move forward is to see things as they actually were. My father left me what he wanted me to have. I have it now. That's enough to start with.